Okay, guys, let's go ahead and get started. I apologize for being a few minutes late. We were solving TikTok and several of the nation's problems. Beth will share with you where it came out. So good afternoon. So I see a lot of friendly faces, but also a lot of first timers. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Steve Slick, Director of the Intelligence Studies Project, and on behalf of the Clements Center for National Security, the Strauss Center for International Security and Law, and our host here at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. Welcome to today's event on intelligence support to the president. So we're rapidly approaching the finish line for our spring semester, but the calendar of events and visits is seemingly unrelenting. So I'd encourage you to please check your websites for the full schedule, but here's several upcoming visits that just caught my eye when I was preparing this. So this Thursday, as in 2 days, Clements Center is hosting Jonathan Hunt from Yale War College at Patton Hall for a talk on how America policed the atom from Hiroshima, Vietnam. Next Tuesday, also in Patton Hall, the Asia Policy Program sponsoring a talk by Isaac Garden from the Naval War College on China's interpretation of the law of the sea. And the following day, really looking forward to an event at the atrium of the LBJ Presidential Library. Presidential historian Melvin Leffler from the University of Virginia will be presenting his research on George W. Bush and the Iraq invasion, the invasion of Iraq. So a quick word on format for today's event. Thanks for coming out. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our distinguished visitor, Beth Sanner. We've asked Beth to speak for just a few moments on the broad topic of supporting senior national security policymakers with intelligence, focusing on the so-called first customer. When Beth wraps up, she's agreed to field questions that could be on any topic related to intelligence and national security. Beth has worked some tough rooms before, so there's no need for us to intervene and moderate what will certainly be a quarterly conversation. So we're incredibly fortunate. So we're incredibly fortunate that Beth Sanner has agreed to meet with us today. And frankly, Beth's spending the better part of a week on campus, meeting with students in the classroom and other settings. He's already met today with Professor Imboden's Ethics and International Affairs seminar. When we finish here, she's off to role play in Professor Klein's counterterrorism law course. Tomorrow and Thursday, she'll be meeting with the Brumley Fellows and joining 2 of Professor Pope's courses, the Thinking, Writing, and Briefing seminar, as well as the Intelligence and National Security course for undergraduates. So we're extremely grateful for her generosity and investment in the next generation of national security leaders. Beth retired last year, 2 years ago?
September 21.
September
Don't make me do
21.
math.
After a remarkable 35-year career in U.S. intelligence, she served most recently as the Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Mission Immigration. That's the number 3 official in the U.S. intelligence community. And in recent years, that's a job that has also come with the ancillary responsibility of briefing the U.S. President. So before being appointed to that post, Beth directed the office that actually produces the President's Daily Brief. She also served as Vice Chair of the National Intelligence Council. She grew up in CIA's Directorate of Analysis, where she held a number of line and leadership positions. And highly relevant to our mission here at the university, Beth also led the Career Analyst Program at CIA, where all the new analysts are sent to learn their craft. And finally, it must be acknowledged that Beth achieved all of this despite the negative influence of several dodgy personal and professional acquaintances, most of whom will remain nameless, but one of them is me. Beth and I were classmates as career trainees in the 1980s, when young operations officers and analysts were actually encouraged and allowed to mix. And so Beth's been a friend literally from the first day I joined the CIA, and I'm delighted to have you join me and welcome them. 48 years.
So we have a ringer in the room here too, a former Deputy National Intelligence Officer who will keep me honest, probably. So I'm really delighted to be here. I do like to come to campuses and talk to people. I feel like it's not just about the next generation, but it's also about having the American people understand a little bit more about the intelligence community. You know, trying to be a little bit more transparent and explaining things. So I welcome your questions. I may not answer all of them. Depends. So I wanted to do two things today. One, I want to talk about what the president's daily brief is and, briefing the president, what that's all about. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the lessons learned. And that's mainly for, I think, students, perhaps, in thinking about what I think are the important lessons. And it doesn't just apply to briefing the president, but it applies, I think, in life. So, because so much of what we do in our professional lives, it really all starts here. It starts at the beginning of your careers and how you begin to think about your role and how you interact with people. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's start off with, so as President Trump's briefer, so I was at the pointy end of the spear, as they say, but I also, throughout my entire career was involved in producing what's called the President's Daily Brief. Does anybody know what is actually the PDB? What is it? You get your hands around it. What is the PDB? Yeah.
It's a daily report produced by the CIA, which outlines the top national security priorities.
Almost. It was not just produced by the CIA, it's produced by the intelligence community. Although increasingly it is produced now by the CIA, the people in charge of it. But when I was there, we had the nirvana of ICU participation because I thought it was very important. But it is the classified newspaper, basically, of the intelligence community. So it is the all those secrets and knowledge put together into insightful articles. And it has existed for quite a long time. Does anybody know who the first president was to receive the President's Daily Brief in that name?
In that name would have been Johnson, although Kennedy had the president's goal.
Yeah, intelligence checklist. So I think this is really cool. I spent the day yesterday at the library, at the LBJ library. And if you all haven't spent time there, you need to go back and, you should spend some time there. It is a wonderful place. And you all are, I think, so blessed to be at a place where so much of what our country is about, came out of LBJ. And the PDB for the intelligence community is one of those things. It's the closest thing to what exists today. It started with LBJ. So the president's checklist was actually begun under Kennedy. And it was only given to Kennedy for a few months. And then he expanded it to a few people, SecDef and SecState, but not to Vice President Johnson. Vice President Johnson discovered that CIA was providing this secret newspaper, basically, to the President of the United States on the day he walked into the Oval Office, the day after the assassination. Surprise! And then Johnson, for a while, took this briefing. He took a briefing from the head of CIA, but then he was so busy. I mean, you think about when you go through the library, you realize how much foreign policy was going on, stuff I had forgotten about, as well as the Great Society. I mean, there was a lot going on, and he got to be a little bit busy. And so CIA folks realized like they had lost their customer. So here they were producing this book for this classified newspaper, and it was going to lots of people at that point, but the president wasn't reading. I don't know if you followed Trump at all, but that's kind of a little flash of history. My personal experience, lots of people were getting this daily publication, but the president wasn't reading it. What do you do? So the CIA folks figured out like, oh gosh, what's his daily life? How are we going to figure this out? How do we make sure that the president knows what's going on? And they realized that he did all of his reading at night. He would get this big binder or whatever at night. And so they produced something shorter, 2 pages. Each thing, they had like 3 things per page, 3 items per page. That was it. And it went into his nightly reading and he fell in love with it. And the rest is history. But it's an example that each president handles things differently. Kennedy got briefings all the time, and he got, he had his own checklist thing, and it was developed for him. It was very idiosyncratic to his needs. And then they figured out what Johnson needed. And when I came in as president Trump's free firm, I was lucky that there had been someone who was a good friend of mine briefing for the first 2 years. So I came in the last 2 years. And so, Ted had figured out a lot of how to do this. And one of the things he figured out was to write an outline. And this outline, literally just an outline. And he gave that to the president, and it was figure this out like his last couple weeks. And he said, Beth, I don't know why in the world I did not figure this out sooner. But this outline was this wonderful thing, something to think about as you do your presentations when you talk to a boss or whatever. It gave, the president exactly what we were going to talk about. And when I came in, I was head of the PDB before that, and I had made up for Ted this beautiful paper, this really heavy paper, and I made a special golden eagle on the top, and I had this paper. Ted didn't want to do that. He just wanted something casual. And I was like, why are you doing that? So my first day, I came in with an outline on this lovely paper with this beautiful gold eagle. And he loved that. He just loved that. And it was just a special thing. Like, it was like, it was like me saying to him, you're important to me. I'm giving you this. You're the president of the United States. All legal for you. Anyway, it was just a special thing. But each president has their thing. What I did, I really emphasized graphics and visuals. And I know people have made fun of that, and it kind of pisses me off. Like, I'm sorry, but I don't know when a picture, wasn't worth 1,000 words. All of a sudden, when somebody you don't like gets that, you think it's funny and you make fun of it. That's not true. That's silliness. Graphs, maps. I mean, who doesn't love a good map, for goodness sake? You know what's going on if you got a good map, or you create something sophisticated, or you show a picture that really explains who a person is, or you make a video of a leader and someone can really visualize that leader and understand who they are and what they're about. That gives somebody a decision advantage when they walk in the room. Where that person came from. These things, all matter. And so I really focused on using things that were sophisticated things, or sometimes very simple things, as a way of supplementing what was an 100% oral briefing. So, for me, it was twice a week, minimum of a half an hour each time, sometimes ran over an hour. Pros and cons of that were that, I had to condense a daily publication into twice a week. But the beauty of that was I got to condense all of these different things into stories. And when you think about how, who are good communicators, storytellers, people who can put together a story and explain to you why things matter and how things tie together and how things relate to each other, right? That's the beauty of communication. It's not someone reading something to you and then jumping to the next thing and it has no relationship to the previous thing and then the next thing. That's boring, and it's not actually how the world works. And I think the connectivity of our world today is such that making those connections for someone and helping them understand how one thing can affect another or is affecting another is just a great thing. And so, I thought of myself as not like a child storyteller, but as a storyteller, you can now get a degree in that. So, stepping back a little bit on the PDB, we kind of assume this thing is important. But now that we have open source intelligence and, just proliferating like crazy, we have all of these think tanks writing wonderful pieces. You all read them all the time. You might wonder why the PDB is important. Anybody have any ideas why the PDB might be important? Yeah.
Because it contains classified information that open source usually doesn't.
Yes, that is the first thing. because what in the intelligence community does is called all source intelligence, right? It takes open source, but it layers all of the secret information on top of it. But it also takes this information from all these different agencies. And that's why I push back a little bit on the CIA. I mean, one of the great things about the PDB is it really is the voice of the intelligence community, the entire intelligence community. It has to be coordinated by all of the intelligence community, but it also includes information from all parts of the intelligence community, and it includes the wisdom and the insight from experts. And look at a topic like North Korea. No one agency can do analysis on North Korea. It's just too complex now. You need those analysts who do, overhead analysis down at NGA, National Geospatial, to really understand, what is happening at this facility? What are they watching? How to make sense of that? And you need the experts who have linguistic capabilities, maybe at NSA. You need people who are engineers. You need people who understand how the nuclear fuel cycle works. You need geologists, seismologists. You need all sorts of people, and they are all over the intelligence community. You need economists, you need psychologists, right? So it takes a village, I think, to do great analysis. And one of the things that the intelligence community can do, unlike any other place in the world, is that we can almost instantaneously pull together people with all of those different backgrounds and skills together. And we do it all the time. We have communities of interest, communities of practice, where we're pulling people together from all across. Mainly in the academic community, you don't have that. It is very hard to make those connections outside of your field. That's what we do. So we take this information, we layer it, we take our insight and our expertise, the deep expertise, and we put that together. So a lot of this has to do with what it is, right? It's the material that we present, but it's also because we're having a conversation. So when an intelligence briefer is in the room with a principal, you're actually finding out information from them that's informing what you're writing the next day or the next week. So this is something that people on the outside never can do. You don't know what the tempo is, what the schedule is, what the next meeting is going to be on in depth. You don't know the questions that are being asked. You can surmise big picture, but you don't really know what that agenda is for the principals committee meeting. Or when is this person going on a trip 2 weeks in advance? Who are they meeting with? What do they need to know? And it is that inside information that truly informs this conversation. What else? Yeah.
What are some other groups outside the CIA in the intelligence community
Other groups outside the intelligence
or
community?
inside the intelligence community that are not the CIA?
So National Security Administration is up at NSA, Clements Center. DIA, Defense, INR, which is all source at State Department. All of the military organizations have their own intel. NGA is National Geospatial. Am I missing any big letters?
Department of Treasury.
Treasury, FBI, DHS. These all have intel organizations. Thank you. I don't know where my brain is. I think the other thing that's really important is level setting. So the PDB isn't just read by the president. It is read by the entire national security team. And I'll explain in a minute how that all works. But that means that everybody is reading the same baseline of analysis. There's an agreed upon understanding of what's important and what the intelligence community thinks. And I can't tell you how many times a briefer would come back and say, General Mattis was asking whether Sec State read that piece. And they would go into the briefer for Sec State, did, so-and-so read that piece? Yes or no? If not, make sure that you tell him that I read it and I want to have a conversation about that. There is this enormous amount of conversation that's going on outside of what most people realize with this baseline information that the intelligence community is providing. Almost every policy meeting I ever went to started with a briefing from the intelligence representative to provide that, what's going on right now? What do we know? What do we analyze? What do we think? And then the conversation starts from there. And oftentimes in the package that's given out before those meetings or during those meetings, it contains a PDB or another intelligence community piece that level sets that conversation. There is no other intelligence organization in the world where that happens. Nowhere else. And so, you know, when it comes to the intelligence community and what our writ is, which is to provide objective, unbiased information that has no policy goal. I'm butchering the language here, but it's from the statute. There are very few intelligence communities in the world that also have that writ of providing that objective analysis that doesn't have a policy angle to it. And that's why CIA remains very central, because a number of the other agencies still have that agency to leadership link that makes them not quite as all sources and objective. But I think it's still across the board. And when you get the intelligence community getting together and agreeing on lines, that really helps. So to me, all of that is really important. But the most important thing about the PDB is it is the embodiment of the relationship, of the personal relationship between the intelligence community and the policymaker. And that embodiment of that is every briefer for the PDB who goes into a senior policymaker and sits across a table from them and briefs them and answers questions for them. It is that personal relationship between that senior policymaker and the intelligence community. And the PDB is the way that that happens. And when you think about the intelligence community and what it's based on integrity. That what we're doing is to provide this service of unbiased analysis, unfettered by policy prescription, and trust. And it's so much easier to have that relationship when it's personal. If you don't have that personal relationship, it's super easy to say like, oh, the intelligence community, they're so full of shit. You know, they're just trying to, you know, say something like this. I don't agree with it. What do they know? They need to go back to school. I think I've heard that one. But if I'm sitting in front of you, it's so much harder to say that. And in fact, if you like me, maybe you'll listen to me a little bit, even if you don't agree with me. And so I think that to me, that is really what the PDB is about. It is about the personal relationship. It is about the embodiment of this relationship of trust, which is based on integrity between members of the intelligence community and the most senior people in our country who are making decisions. And to be able to have a conversation with them and to ask questions and to say, you know, I really don't buy that. And then the person says, yeah, let me go back and ask some more questions about that. Let's see if we can pull that apart a little bit. That's really what it's all about. There is no other country in the world where these relationships exist. Not one. So I feel like we're very special and we're very, very lucky. So let me just hold questions for a second. I want to tell you just briefly about how this all works. So about 1 a.m., alarm bells, iPhones, alarm clocks go off. And these are PDB briefers. They get up around 1 a.m., they drag themselves into work, and they start going through all the material that the intelligence community produced. The PDB articles, but also, you know, the articles that were written by the CIA and the Wire, the articles that were written by INR and State Department, the intercepts, the most important intercepts that have come in, the overhead imagery that's come in, and the people from the operations center come down and they flag things and they say, this is what's happened overnight. And then, you know, they're reading and then they're talking amongst each other because each of these briefers come from different agencies and they work on different things. You'll have a Latin America expert, and you'll have a nuclear expert, and you'll have, you know, someone who comes from NSA and someone who comes from NGA, and they all talk amongst each other. They have a group chat and they have this conversation and they figure out what's going on and what's important. And then they know what's going on with their own principle. And so they not only just take this core thing called the PDB, the book, but they say, oh gosh, you know, my guy is going to this meeting, or, you know, the woman that I support is going on this trip. So I'm going to pull together this other stuff and I'm going to curate this information. And I'm going to create not just the PDB core here, but I'm going to add on things that have to do with their schedule, their needs, their interests. So you get this curated thing. You have this person who's like just in your space, thinking about what matters to you as a senior policymaker, and they put together something for you. It's a beautiful thing. I miss this so much. I loved it when people did this for me. And then you have the authors of these pieces come in, and the briefer gets to ask questions of those authors. So, you know, maybe this wasn't clear, or maybe my person really cares about this and I don't know enough about the details of this, or I'm not technical. Can you please explain this to me? So they get briefed up. And then about 6 a.m., when most of us are just getting up or just hit snooze, they actually are getting in cars and they're fanning out across Washington, and they're preparing then to give briefings to, you know, a dozen or more of these principals. And that's how it works. I mean, it's a pretty amazing machine. And I think everybody who works in these jobs feels so privileged, even though they're getting up in the middle of the night. They get so much out of it. And you think about the level of these people. These aren't all senior people who are doing this these days. These are, you know, people who, you know, are in their 30s. I don't know. They still have to get up at 1 a.m. So I want to stop there just talking about that. And where are we on time? 12:50, and we're going to
go to 12:15, 12:30 as the questions dictate.
Okay,
Excuse me, I'm sorry, 1:30.
1:30. So I have time. So I'm gonna switch now to some lessons learned, and we'll just hold questions to the end. So, you know, I can talk about lessons learned in terms of, you know, how to create a great video, great graphic. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about, you know, for me, what it takes to be a great intelligence officer. But I also think these things are about, you know, what it takes to be successful just in the real world. And I think it applies no matter where you are in life. And the first lesson I have is know who you are. And I'll start with a little story. When I was a kid, little kid, my dad used to come into my bedroom to say goodnight, and he'd play this little game with me. And he'd bump his head against my head and he'd say, who am I? And he'd bump his head again, where am I? And it'd be this game of amnesia that would just drive me completely crazy as a little kid. It's like, Dad, you're dead. right? And I was sitting in the Oval Office one day at the very beginning, and that story popped into my head. Where am I? Who am I? How did I get here? This total sense of, thinking about when you're a kid and this amnesia. And I think the thing about when you're in the Oval Office like that, you're sitting across the most important person in the world. The vice president is to my left. The Secretary of State is on the couch. Secretary of Defense is sometimes there. National Security Advisor is always there. And in that moment, I think it's so important just to know who you are. Right? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What's important to you? How do you behave in a situation like that? Do you pretend you're someone you're not? Do you pander? Do you tell the truth? Do you give him information that you're not sure what he's going to do with it? There were days when I would present information and I thought, something that I needed to tell him, and he acted completely 180 of what I expected. But, the intelligence officer doesn't get to pick. You don't get to decide what you should say or what you shouldn't say based on what you're worried about or how he might react or whether he'll be mad. And so I think really understanding and being confident about what it is you believe in and who you are. Not everybody behaved in that room in that way. And you could see that, this is the height of power. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on between those people and the president. That's not who you are. That is not your job. You are the least important person in the room, and you're there to do one thing. You're not there to talk about politics. You're not there to be part of the cabal. You're not in, you're not out. You are the briefer. And I think remembering that is really important. One day, fairly early on, I got up to go and I thought everybody was leaving, right? And I leave the door, walk out the door, the Oval Office door, and the door shuts behind me. Not one other person left. So the head of the CIA was there and the head of the intelligence community was there, national security advisor, everybody stayed. And I was like, the hell just happened? Like, I'm out, right? And I said to the secretary who was sitting there, Madeline, before she got fired, and I said, like, I should be in there. They're continuing this conversation. And she's like, you should just go back in. I was like, I can't do that. And I was walking back across the street to the DNI's office in the Eisenhower building. And I started thinking, it's like, why is that bothering you? Like, what is it about that is upsetting? Because you're not in. That cool kid, right? You're not like important enough to be there. And I thought, this is exactly where I should be, not in there. Because there is power to not being part of that. You're not going to be up one day and out the other, right? Not being part of that was a gift. It was good not being part of that. It allowed me to do my job. And if I worried so much about being part of like, the in crowd, eventually I would have found myself on the out crowd. And that was not my job. My job was to go in and to keep coming in and doing my job. So that was my first lesson. The second lesson is to put fear aside. And I think that's sometimes easier said than done. I talked in the ethics class about fear and inertia being the two most powerful and negative influences in our lives. And I really believe that. I really believe that. So much of what we do that we regret doing is because of fear and inertia. We can make so many mistakes because we're afraid. We don't do the right thing, or we say something because we're worried someone's going to be mad at us or not like us, or we're worried about losing our jobs, or whatever it is. Fear. It is such a powerful force. And if you're really going to do a hard job, you got to figure out how to control that. It's going to be there. I was afraid a lot. He never saw that. Most people who know me do not think that I have much fear. Mike, do I have a lot of fear?
Well, I'm scared of you, Beth, so I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. So I worried and had fear all the time. I just figured out how to, put my big boy pants on and just do it. And once you're in that moment and you have the competency, you know what you're doing. This is why it's so important for people, all of you who are starting out, just to practice your craft and get good at it, because it is the thing that will sustain you. And then you can put fear aside once you start talking, once you start doing the thing that you are training yourself to do, then you can put that fear aside and just go. And I won't, because we're being recorded here, tell some of the stories I can tell, but I think that one of the things that the president realized about me, or thought about me, was that I was not afraid. I started off my first day, he said something to me and I just laughed out loud. And I said, not my job. And I also violated a second rule that day, and I went around the Oval Office desk and to show him something. I realized about a year later, when his assistant said that no one goes around the Oval Office desk without being invited, and I said, what? I broke that rule the first day. Being comfortable about who you are. It gets back to that first thing. I know who I am. I was an intelligence officer. I was a good intelligence officer. Right? I knew that because I worked at that. And I didn't think about anything else as I was giving those presentations. Everything else didn't matter. I was just trying to convey the material. And I would, he'd go off and people would go off talking about stuff, and I'd be like, intel briefing. And I'd laugh, right? I mean, it was all fun, and we laughed every day. I laughed pretty much every day. I think, it's not about taking your medicine. All right, the last thing, third lesson, is to be humble. And I think that humility is a very underrated characteristic. I was telling the ethics class that, saying you were wrong is it's just this great thing to do. Just admitting it. Because the person on the other side that you're saying they were right, they will love you when you say you were right. Anyone in a relationship, say you're sorry. Say they were right. It is such a gimme. It is such a gift. And I think that this humility comes with that, right? It's like, I know I'm not right all the time. That's how I learned. I know the intelligence community is not right all the time. It's kind of documented. Iraq WMD folks, you know, it's like, oops, like that wasn't good. But the thing was, we learned from it, and the intelligence community got so much better because we had leaders who had courage to say, what did we do wrong there? We have got to figure out how that went wrong, and we got to make sure we don't repeat that again. And we changed how we did things. We changed how we trained. The way I started as an intelligence analyst, nothing like how the intelligence analysts operate today. It's all becomes from humility and accepting that you're not right all the time. Plus, who wants to be around someone who's right all the time? It's so boorish. But, you know, I used to listen to a song before I would do briefings. My predecessor, Ted, he would listen to a song. It was like, I don't know, some kind of heavy metal, like getting his like, you know, getting his adrenaline up. I listened to 21 Pilots, Don't Believe the Hype. Because that's what I thought. I mean, there were people who were saying like, oh my gosh, Beth, you know, like, can you help on this briefing or that briefing, you know, outside the info realm, because they thought I figured it out, right? Don't believe the hype. Because once you believe the hype, they'll smell it. You're doomed. This is all about attitude, right? Being humble. I can't make anybody be that way. But I can tell you, you'll be more successful with humility. And if you don't have that, you can't really listen. One of my phrases is that you need to listen to be heard. You know, it's so important to hear the other person and take that in. How many of us like didn't hear what the other person said because we were thinking about what we were going to say? Ugh. We all do that. Terrible. Because that's not a conversation. Take the risk of like not having the perfectly phrased thing that you're about to say. Worry less about having that perfectly phrased thing, or write it down quickly so then you can listen. Because that person, I'm telling you, if you listen and look at them like you're listening to them, and hear them and respond in a way like, huh, that's a good point. Let me think about that for a second. Actually, I think it's right here, but I disagree with this. Here's why. You know, the intelligence community does not believe that. I can understand why you think that. So I know he was in here yesterday telling you that. But the intelligence community thinks this, and this is why. I just went in there and lectured. That would not work. It would not work. Nobody likes that. So I think this is all just part of this attitude of humility and service and listening and giving, being okay with being wrong, right? Having a relationship of trust based on integrity. So it's all related. I'll just stop there. Questions?
Yeah, you made a wonderful and insightful presentation about spies and spy agencies. Ours, great. What I'm curious about is what about other spies in other countries that work for those countries, and also the spy agency that they work for? To what extent are they spying on us, the United States?
Everybody spies. Second oldest profession in the world. Next, there was someone over here.
You have done an excellent job in describing how you handle a situation. The president actually doesn't quite believe what has been told, and you go back and you get more answers and you get more information. Think of a hypothesis in which the president not only doesn't quite believe what's being said, he believes that the messages are coming from people who are misfits and lowlifes. And you're there sitting there defending the intelligence community. How do you go one step beyond in order to get the main recipient of this information to have respect for the information that's being provided?
Well, again, I think it gets back to that personal relationship, you know, do you think that I'm dumb? I'm not necessarily defending the intelligence community. I'm simply saying, here are the facts. Here is the analysis. Here is why we think that. So a lot of this is about transparency in the analysis. And it's one of the things that the Iraq WMD intelligence failure led to, was we became transparent in how we showed our work. That's what we used to call it. We showed our work. So we didn't just say, you know, the IC believes X or assesses X. We'd say, because we assess X because, and then provide the argumentation and the supporting information. So you could look through that argument yourself and say, I don't buy it or I buy it. So having a conversation, I think, around why you think something and having the courage to say, that's interesting that you think that. Why? Do you mind telling me why you think that? And then trying to have, you know, more conversation. I did not find, you know, your hypothesis didn't happen to me. Didn't.
A situation where the main recipient of the information actually believes the word of your main opponent, or one of your main opponents on the world scene, and says your intelligence community is bunk, what he said is correct. How do you handle that?
Well, it wasn't a great day. But again, I think also people say things publicly that they might not say personally. They may not even believe personally. I don't know. But you have to have a conversation about it. And just because someone declares that they believe a certain thing doesn't mean that you don't go in the next day when you have new information to provide that contradicts that. It's your job to do that. And that's not easy. In fact, you know, what I think it's kind of interesting is that, you know, a lot of people criticize, you know, the oral briefing versus a recipient who reads. And I actually think that the recipient who gets an oral briefing, that's puts you in a different territory that actually allows you to have these conversations and to say things that someone reading who didn't believe, they would simply just skip over them. You know, just, I don't want to read this. I see the title, I don't believe it. And they just would flip the page. We had lots of examples of that where people would come back and, you know, a briefer would say, they turned the page. They looked at the title, they turned the page, they didn't read it. They didn't want to read it. Well, I'm sitting there and I'm just talking. Much harder to stop me. Very hard to stop me. Has been done. But very hard to stop me. One more thing. Okay, I get it. But let me just tell you one more thing that I think you'd be surprised to know. It's very hard. It takes courage. It's not easy. But I'll tell you, every single briefer I know had these experiences with their principals. It wasn't just the president I served. I have friends who served under George W. Bush. It wasn't always an easy brief. He remembered everything you told him. And when you said something that was different, he remembered that you told him something different. You better have an explanation. Or as a friend of mine said, you know, on the day that the jobs numbers came out, I did not want to go in and brief. Right, cranky pants mood. Right, I mean, these are human beings. And I think that all of us would be surprised that the caricatures, either good or bad, often aren't borne out every day in reality. You know, I just think that sometimes, you know, yeah, sure, those things are true. Sometimes they're not. I don't know. You just have to do your best no matter what, though, because you have a job.
Thank you very much. And what I would be interested to hear from you is, what are the trade-offs when you were catering for needs for your ultimate customer, and they can come in the product can come in two ways, oral form or written form.
Yeah,
Having in mind that some of the highly complex information that you have to relay in relatively short time, there must be some sort of a trade-off between what you can put on paper in terms of clarity or explanation versus what you described, but like we this point or highlight and still keep cool.
yeah, I don't know how sometimes I did kind of keep myself together, but again, you kind of get in the zone. Maybe it's like the baseball player where, you know, the ball is coming across the plate and slow motion, you know, where you kind of just, you're in the moment and you just live that moment and all just kind of slows down. The question was about, you know, what happens if you don't get what you need quickly enough, that there's a timeliness quality to it, and also kind of a complexity problem too, that what you get isn't always enough. And I mean, I think that this is where, you know, the PDB briefer has to use some discretion and sometimes go beyond what is actually in the written product. And so, you know, when there's news that's breaking, for example, you don't have anything. So you just pick up the phone, you start calling people you know are really good, right? I mean, you've got your favorite Iran analyst. You've got your favorite North Korea missile guy. You've got, you know, the woman who does COVID at INR and is an epidemiologist. You know, you just know like who to call. And I had a small staff, a couple of people who were with me and were my briefer and my assistant. And we would just start figuring out like what we were going to say. We would often call the national intelligence officer because they represented the whole community and they were the broad and deep people. And, you know, we would kind of get it together and just, you know, 'cause you have to go in and do your thing. For me, the sophistication, you know, like I built a lot of visuals that were very complex, like multiple kind of, we call them placemats that had multiple stories in them to break them apart. And so I created those especially for him to tell the story the way I wanted to tell it, and that combined different things together. And to me, those were great, and he kept a lot of those. So picture things on the floor there. Yeah, so but those were really great ways of conveying sophistication and complexity and walking through, you know, a graph, a map, a picture, you know, an overhead, you know, a photograph. You could really, I tell people like, you know, with 2 pages of text and graphics, how could you not tell a complex story? There's something wrong with you if you cannot figure out how to use that amount of real estate to tell a very complex story. But I also think that rarely do you have to tell an entire story at one sitting. So think about that when you're writing the things for your papers or you're giving a presentation for your boss, is that usually you get to go back again, right? Like, oh, I forgot to say something, or I didn't get to do that, or right? Usually you get another talk, another bite of the apple. So try not to kick yourself about not doing something, and doing the whole thing. Sometimes it's better to have a plan actually for a presentation that spans over time. We call that an arc of analysis. So I know I'm going to tell the story about, Iran's enrichment, right? And I'm going to be telling it over time, I'm going to tell different parts of the story over time. And I think that's a really good presentational thing. And you can also just say, like, today we're going to talk about this aspect of it. I'm going to explain the nuclear fuel cycle today. And then we're going to delve in tomorrow about them. Next time I see you, we'll talk about the missile program, how these all come together, right? So there are ways of doing that. Yeah.
I'll be seeing you tomorrow. I'm in Professor Pope's writing class, but I had sort of a two-part question on how a deep dive presentation might differ from sort of just the concise current PDB briefs. And also, whenever you had to do those sort of technical briefs when you're explaining like the nuclear enrichment cycle, how did you sort of balance needing to explain something technical without making a policymaker feel incompetent or
dumb?
Yeah.
First, I think knowing your audience is the most important thing. So, one of the things we tell new analysts is that before you put pen to paper, before you prepare a briefing, is know who that person is that you are presenting to. So knowing your audience is absolutely crucial. And part of that is when you have a person that you're dealing with on a regular basis is do a little research, right? Figure out, like, is this person an engineer? Do they know a lot about this topic? Have they ever, have they never been out of the country? I'm explaining something that they don't really understand. And then ask questions as you're doing it and just set it up. It's like, let me know if this is something known to you, and we'll skip ahead. But, and I think also just the way that you give it in terms of having that mindset of humility and service, you just come across not being a jerk. You know how some people give briefings and they just sound arrogant? Everybody has one of those people in your class, just super annoying. And, it's like, I know I was at the war college, we used to actually do a bet on when the guy, that we all love to hate was gonna stand up and give the question, and we have a bet on whether it was gonna be the first one or not. Anyway, don't be that, right? You just want to be like a normal human being. And I think that the more, you have to have respect for the formality of whatever situation you're in, but that doesn't mean that you have to be like kind of an uptight person. And then you convey that. I again, really rely very heavily on visuals when it comes to things like this, and walking through and referring to a visual as you're walking through something technical. That's kind of what was that? What was the rest of it?
The difference between like the collated PDB and like a deep dive.
So, whenever we gave deep dives, in other words, we would take up a session and have someone just very, very expert. I think also knowing where the limits are of your own expertise and calling someone in, and, I would know that, like, okay, I've kind of come to the limit of what I can do here. And I think you'd benefit from having someone super deep to come in and talk. And most people like that if you do it well. I made sure that we practiced over and over and over. And so people were like, I don't want to practice anymore. And after every session that happened, no matter how senior the person was, they came up to me afterwards and thanked me for that. Because if you know that first, if you know what your main points are and you can convey them without tripping up your words, without like messing up, and I want to make these 3 points no matter what, no matter where the conversation goes. And the person's about to shut down and leave, it's time to go, and you haven't conveyed one of those, you need to circle back and say, the one thing I really wanted to tell you, and you just got it, you know, you have it because you've practiced it over and over again. So I'm not a person who's like, I never practiced anything. I did extemporaneous speaking when I was in high school. I am not a person who writes an outline for a paper. Sorry, professors, hate outlines. I'm just like not like that. I don't practice for things. I procrastinate. But I'm telling you, when when you're going to be briefing the head of the Navy, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or your dean, you should probably spend a little bit more time than usual and force yourself to practice. And know those key messages. Ask yourself, what are the 2 or 3 things, no more, that this person, that I need to convey? 2 or 3 messages that they should take away from that conversation. And know them by heart. If your mom called you up and said, honey, what are those 3 messages you want your boss to know? You could just give them. That's what you want. So those deep dives, organized, usually only one visual, but organized, but also because everybody was locked down, had a lot of freedom to go wherever the principal wanted to go, because you knew if you needed to bring them back, because you knew those 3 messages. So my job was always to like bring the message home, because during the practice, I learned those 3 things too. I don't know if that's helpful or not for your lives, but yeah.
So you talked about like a culture of integrity and using explanations to like make sure that politics and biases are not in the briefing.
As much as possible, yes.
What other like strategies and tactics did you use to make sure that there's no bias in politics wrapped up?
Well, I personally believe that you can mitigate for bias, but you can never remove it completely. We are products of where we come from. We all come from, basically these liberal arts schools, and we're taught theory of international relations. It's all pretty much the same. So we have these biases. And there's a wing of American politics now that completely rejects just the foundation of some of these things that we've been taught to believe. So I don't think you can remove it completely. And I think it's very important to have diversity as well as processes that create a challenge environment. So because groupthink and being surrounded by all the same people, whether it is race, upbringing, background, countries, all this kind of diversity. I'm using the, really big picture word of diversity, different agencies, you just want to have people who are asking questions, and you want to be an environment where you instill certain methods of challenging assumptions, conventional wisdom, and you use tools and processes to do that, because it's just inherent. We're human beings. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your talk. I really appreciated the piece of advice you left us with at the end. I think given the kind of unique and interesting background and perspective that they're coming from, I think I'd be interested to know what your advice would be for many of us students and professionals at different points in our schooling and career, sort of as we contemplate different decision points in our own careers, and what you found to be useful advice, and sort of getting to the position where you've been, in navigating big trade-offs when we have to make those decisions.
So I never planned a day in my career. Not one. I never, I only applied when in a couple of circumstances where people told me to apply. So I'm kind of, I'm kind of, that's not what you should do. It's just what I did. And it's not like a path. Don't do that. I'm like, don't never plan anything. So I don't know about that. It's just kind of what I did, because that's who I am. And you can't really be someone you're not. So I think that, surrounding myself as much as possible, with people I respected and could learn from was the best thing I could do. And I lucked out in some circumstances. In other circumstances, I took jobs with people because I thought they were amazing. I thought, who they were. I just wanted to be with those people. And I trusted people who were really good to say, I really think you need to be doing this. So for example, when I took over the new analyst training program, I really did not want to do that job. But the woman who asked me to do it was someone who was a mentor of mine. And she said, I really want you to learn program management. You have not done any program management in your career. Typical CIA, by the way, horrible program managers, awful. Anyway, don't get me started. I learned how to manage, a program, talk about a program, brief Congress on a program, manage money, manage contractors, do that thing. And I loved that job. She was right. I love that job. Michael Morrell told me, like, I want you to be head of South Asia analysis. I'm like, I've never been to South Asia. I haven't even been vacation on South. I don't know anything about Afghanistan. Right? It's like, this is 2010. It's not like the war just started. And I was like, he said, no, you're gonna be great. Okay. Great job. Right? Wonderful people, amazing experiences. So I think that working for people rather than what you're doing is so important. It's like, I know it's like everybody says that, but it's so true. And I think that also getting out of your comfort zone and being willing to trust other people who say you can do this, it's okay, you can do this. And that's what we now call sponsorship. There's no such word when I was growing up, right? Sponsorship. It means that someone says, you're actually pretty good at this. You can do it. And then they say to someone else who says, that person's kind of junior, they don't have experience. Say, no, that person can do it. That's fine. And you want to have people in your life who are generous with you, but also understand, that you're not perfect and that you have weaknesses and don't put you in a place where you actually can't do it. And then when you get to a place, you want to create a safety net for everyone who works for you to make sure that you give them the wherewithal to succeed and to survive failures. As long as they're done in a way that is, with integrity and like, because you guys live in the Silicon Valley of Texas, right? So what failure's good, but it's not good in a lot of organizations. So you got to make sure that you're with people who allow you and encourage you to take chances and learn and do all that. So I think it's all about who you're with rather than what you're doing.
Beth, we're gonna need to surrender the classroom. You've got other events. So can we?
That was messing me up.
Yes, we're only an hour on.
Why? That was so wrong.
Yeah.
It was like time had stopped.
Everybody gonna thank Beth Sanner.